Hello, and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host, Rob, and today we're going to be talking about the Pact of the Blade Warlock. Now, much like the Valor Bard and the War Cleric, which is still upcoming, or the Champion that I've already discussed, Pact of the Blade Warlock is one that gets a lot of complaints and criticisms online as just not being particularly good at what it's supposed to do. A lot of those complaints seem to have been somewhat alleviated by the Hex Blade patron, and I think that it did add a lot to the class. In fact, the Hex Blade is a phenomenal subclass. It's so good that, pretty much anybody who uses Charisma might want to consider dipping into Hex Blade just because why not? But it's also important to remember that you could be a Pact of the Blade Warlock or a Hex Blade, but not necessarily both. The Hex Blade is your patron and competes with Pact of the Fiend and other, Great Old One, whatever else. Whereas the Pact of the Blade is competing with Pact of the Chain or Pact of the Tome. So you could be a Hex Blade who doesn't use a sword at all and just cast spells, and that's actually a pretty solid build. You will still get medium armor and a shield just by taking Hexblade Warrior, but that's not what we're talking about today. We are specifically going to be concentrating on melee Bladelocks, and this is what usually gets criticized. And a lot of those criticisms are about, basically about everything but the class almost, really. The D8 hit points isn't exactly great, and it puts you on par with like clerics and whatnot, but you have light armor, and the clerics have medium or even heavy armor. Again, the Hexblade does alleviate some of this, and we'll talk more about Hexblades towards the end. It will be a good deal of this video, to be honest. But I also want to look at some of the other patrons and see what maybe they can bring to the table as well. As always, we'll take a look at a bunch of different builds, and we'll go over feats and races and stuff like that as well, which of course are good combinations to take. So it's important to kind of look at the class and think, like, what is my role in the game? Because you don't have heavy armor, you don't have particularly high hit points, you're a pretty decent melee fighter, but you don't have things like cunning action like a rogue does to get in and out of combat a lot more easily. You're just kind of there, and you're a pretty soft target compared to a lot of the others. A lot of this can be alleviated with multi-classing, and we'll get into that more in the build section as well. But it's important to start wondering, well, if I'm doing like decent damage but have crappy armor and substandard hit points, what exactly am I doing well? And I think that's something the Bladelock really struggles with a lot, because it's not that the Bladelock is particularly bad, it's just that caster locks are really easy to do, and with just taking Agonizing Blast with your Eldritch Blast, you can do a lot of damage. Adding your Charisma bonus to every one of your bolts really starts to stack up. In fact, it almost doubles your damage when you think about it. If you are doing a D10 for damage, the average is a 5.5, but with 20 charisma, getting a +5 bonus raises you up to a 10.5 damage. So you're almost doubling it. And you can apply that to every single one of your bolts. So at level 5, you're firing off 2 bolts, and you're doing 2 die 10 plus 10. At level 11, you're doing 3 die 10 plus 15. At level 17 plus, you're doing 4 die 10 plus 20. You can add Hex to that, which is a bonus action to cast, so it's not even interfering with your action. And now you're adding a die 6 to every single one of those hits, as long as it's to the same target. If you have to, if the first target dies and you have to switch targets, then you're not going to be able to add this damage if you're casting it in the same round, because you need a bonus action to transfer it. But the fact is that it's a pretty easy build to do. You're fighting from range, so you're not getting hit as much. And so one starts to wonder, well, if I'm not doing significantly more damage in melee combat, why play a Bladelock at all? Now, usually, I really like classes like this because I'm a big fan of versatility. But if you kind of suck at everything, that doesn't make you versatile. It just makes you kind of bad. And I think that a Bladelock has kind of fallen into this trap for a long time. Now, I've actually played a Bladelock in my friend Brendan's campaign, and it was a military-style campaign, he told us, And so all of our characters were going to be in some way connected to this one like army, and it was in like a three-sided civil war kind of thing. So I decided to multi-class though, and I made a fighter and then went into Warlock after that. And really that alleviated a lot of the problems I have. I was able to start with heavy armor proficiency and a shield if I wanted it. I had proficiency on Constitution saving throws, which means I'm also going to have proficiency on all of my concentration saving throws. So I'm not going to lose concentration on my spells as easily. And you're just a lot more durable. You get things like a bonus action heal, and sure, it doesn't really scale with your level because I'm mostly being a warlock, not a fighter. But at low levels, where you don't have a lot of hit points and it's very easy to die, having an extra D10 plus my fighter level as a bonus action heal gives you a lot of much needed survivability at low levels. And of course, the biggest benefit is just having better armor, because now you can wear heavy armor, you can use a shield, and a lot of the problems that you had originally have already disappeared. Now, maybe you're in a campaign where your Dungeon Master doesn't allow multi-classing, or you just don't want to multi-class. Maybe you think that multi-classing is only for power gamers, or whatever. Or maybe you're just like, I'm the least imaginative person in the world, and I can't think of a good roleplay reason why I'd want to be a warlock. That's always possible, I guess. Me, my guy died and then had an opportunity to come back to life as long as he'd agreed to serve the voice from the darkness, which of course is always a terrible idea, but my character decided to make that choice anyways because, that's where the fun comes in. Now, there are ways that you can go about building at least a decent Bladelock still, even without multi-classing. And we'll take a look quickly at some of the other patrons and what they bring to the table. And then, like I said, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the Hex Blade, of course. Now, one of them is the Pact of the Archfey. And if you take the Archfey as your patron, you get some decent crowd control abilities. You also get some things like improved invisibility, which is pretty nice. You can get Blink, which is decent defensively. And at level 6, you get Misty Escape, I believe is what it's called. Basically, though, if you get hit, you can teleport up to like 60 feet away and turn invisible, I believe. And you can kind of be more of like a skirmisher type. You can get in, do some damage, and then when things get bad, you just kind of get out again. You can use invisibility to give yourself advantage a lot, which is really good if your party doesn't like the whole darkness devil sight combo and they're constantly getting mad at you for, putting everything in darkness. And it has a lot of functionality in that sense, but it still remains pretty squishy. I don't mind it, but it's definitely not my favorite. I don't think that it's necessarily terrible, but there's probably stronger, better options. Now, the one I chose was actually the Pact of the Fiend, because when I made this character, the Hex Blade hadn't even come out yet. So Pact of the Fiend was going to give me some temporary hit points every time I got a killing blow. And those temporary hit points can go a long ways towards satisfying your lack of hit points in general, for a frontline fighter at least. I mean, it's not like a D8 is terrible. You're still on par with like clerics and rogues, but it's not great either, let's be honest. But having a constant flow of temporary hit points coming your way can help to make up for a lot. Another thing that I liked about Pact of the Fiend is that it also gives you Dark One's Own Luck, which allows you to add a die 10 to any of your saving throws and helps you to maintain concentration on something you might have really, really wanted to maintain concentration on. And that can just be a complete game changer if you get hit hard enough, or if you don't have things like Warcaster or Resilient Con yet, or if you don't have proficiency on con saves in general. Or even if you do, just adding a d10 to your saving throw is never going to be a wasted ability. Some of the other abilities they get the Fiendish Resilience, where at level 10 you can choose a damage type, and then you get resistance to that damage type. This is especially good combined with things like, say, Armor of Agathis, where you're getting temporary hit points, and every time you're getting hit, you're reflecting damage back on the attacker equal to 5 times the level of the spell you used. So if you cast it with a 5th level spell slot, which is what you're going to do by the time you're level 10, then every time you get hit, you're reflecting 25 damage back. And if you're like, well, we're probably fighting a bunch of stuff with slashing or piercing damage, for example, and you take resilience against non-magical slashing attacks, then your Armor of Agathis can start going twice as far, and that means that it's just going to deal more and more and more damage. And I kind of like that combination, but let's be honest, it's not very easy to pull off. I mean, it only works against non-magical damage, so it's not as good as a Barbarian Rage, and you have to specify the damage type before you probably know what you're going to be fighting. So if you chose slashing, and it turns out you're fighting something that does bludgeoning damage, you could, not even benefit from it at all. Granted, you could choose not to cast Armor of Agathis at that fight, but if you already pre-cast it, or maybe you had some damage left over from the last fight, then it's not necessarily going to work out great. It's kind of one of those things where it's great when it does work, and Fiendish Resistance on its own is still a pretty decent ability, and if it works out, then awesome, and if it doesn't, then you're like, well, okay. But it's not really something you can build a character around, because you just can't plan for it and be consistent enough with it. I actually wrote down some notes on this one, sorry. Another thing, though, that I really like about the Pact of the Fiend is Hurl through Hell. It's got to be one of the best CCs in the game. It's a crowd control that just requires you to land a hit. There's no saving throw against it. And especially by the time you're level 14, you have this ability, you're fighting a lot of stuff that has legendary resistances. So if I'm given the choice between an ability that works on a hit roll or an ability that allows a saving throw, at this level I will always choose relying on a hit roll, because legendary saves and magic resistance are extremely common at this kind of level range, and the last thing you want is to try to crowd control your big boss guy and then just have him oh, I use a legendary resist and nothing happens. It also does a truckload of damage, because 10 die 10 is nothing to laugh at. So for a crowd control ability that has no saving throw, it's pretty spectacular. It does require a hit roll, but that's not necessarily a bad thing either. You can activate it off an Eldritch Blast, for example, which gives you 3 chances to hit them by the time you're 14th level. Or if it's a caster enemy and you're worried about them trying to counterspell you, then you can do it with a melee attack, in which case there's now basically nothing they can do. If you succeeded on your hit roll, you can just choose to banish them. And you can choose to use the ability after you've already determined if it's a hit or not, kind of like a Paladin Smite. So it's not going to be wasted. If you missed, you just don't use it. And if you did hit, then you're good, Hurl through Hell. So the Pact of the Fiend has some nice stuff going for it. I'm not trying to say, by the way, that you shouldn't choose any of the other packs. Maybe you have some really cool roleplay ideas. Maybe you're saying oh, I'm going to play Paladin and Warlock multi-class, and I'm going to choose the Celestial Pact, and then my character is going to be kind of this angel who made a bargain with an angel, and that's where a lot of his divine power is coming from. Something like that could be a really fun character to play. Or even a Divine Soul Sorcerer Hi, Liliana. So even a Divine Soul Sorcerer, like I was saying, combined with, say, a Celestial Pact Warlock, could be really cool too. Let me get the door. Anyways, so that kind of thing can be really cool and really thematic. And in every case, if I give build ideas or suggestions or whatever, just remember that the most important thing is to roleplay a character that you're going to enjoy. And if you have a great idea, or you think, hey, this thing could be really fun to play, it's probably going to be fine anyways. Sure, you might not get one specific ability or something else that you might have liked, but in general, it's not going to be a big deal. Having fun is definitely going to trump having, one specific ability that you might have liked or might have needed. And let's be honest, your campaign might not even go all the way to 14 anyways, so who cares? This is going to bring us, though, to the Hex Blade itself. And honestly, Hex Blade is one of the strongest choices you can make. At level 1, you're going to get the Hex Blade Warrior ability, which gives you medium armor and a shield right off the bat. And really alleviates a lot of the Hex Blade's problems. You're also going to get the Hex Blade's Curse, which I kind of feel is stronger generally on casters, but it's not like it's wasted on you either. You can, use a bonus action, cast it on the creature. It's going to give you your proficiency bonus in damage, and it actually does stack with Hex, except that Hex is also a bonus action to cast, so that's a lot of bonus actions, and when you only have one bonus action a round, it takes a while to stack on any damage that you might have wanted to do. But it also doubles your critical threat range, allowing you to crit on a 19 or a 20, which, depending on what you're using for a weapon, could be a nice little perk as well. And when the thing dies, you'll even get some temporary hit points back. Or not temporary, you'll get some hit points back, which is pretty good as well. My real problem with the Hex Blade, though, is that their spell selection is generally pretty weak. I mean, you get things like Shield, which is normally a great defensive spell, but on the Hex Blade, I really feel like it's kind of a trap option, because all your Pact spells are just going to level up automatically along with you. And while Shield is a great defensive spell for a first level spell, using it as a 5th level spell isn't so hot. And so I'm just really not a big fan of stuff like that. You do get Blur, you get Elemental Weapon, which is really nice if you're in a low magic campaign and there's not a lot of magical items. You can use it to cast on any, on whatever weapon you're using. It's going to do an extra D4 damage and of, whatever type you choose. So you can take advantage of vulnerabilities, for example, and it's going to give it a +1 to hit and to damage. And at level 5, well, at spell level 5, so when you're level 9, casting with a 5th level spell slot is going to improve to 2d4 damage, and it's going to become a +2 weapon. So I actually really like the spell for what it gives you. The problem is that it has to be a non-magical weapon. And by the time you're a level 5, maybe you don't have magic items, but in most campaigns, you're probably going to have a magic weapon by the time you're level 9, and that's going to be your Pact weapon. And if you're using a weapon that's not your Pact weapon, then you're not going to be able to use your charisma bonus instead of strength or dex. Oh yeah, sorry, I should have already mentioned that too. One of the best benefits of the Hex Blade is that you can substitute your charisma bonus for your attack and damage instead of strength or dexterity. And that's another thing that the Hex Blade has over some of the other types of Bladelocks, that you don't need to concentrate on a bunch of different stats. Like, for example, if you're going strength on a Warlock, like say if you went Pact to the Fiend, not only do you need to have charisma for your spells, but now you need strength to wear heavy armor, and you need strength to land your attacks, and then you're still a melee combatant and who needs to concentrate on spells. So you're probably going to need some constitution. You might have to invest in feats like Warcaster. I mean, starting fighter will give you constitution as a saving throw at least. But if you didn't start fighter, or if you took one of the other options, like say Paladin or War Cleric or Life Cleric, both of which have excellent reasons to choose them, by the way. We'll talk about those more in the build section. But it means that without proficiency on saving throws, or even with it, you're probably still going to need something like Warcaster. And on a class that's already trying to pump up strength or dex and charisma and have some constitution, and now you're trying to add feats on top of that, there's just not a lot of ability score increases to go around. And if you rolled for stats, it's probably not so bad. Maybe you rolled some really good stats, in which case, that helps to alleviate a lot of these concerns. But if you're using like standard array or point buy, then it starts getting really easy to get spread really thin. And again, I think this is one thing that the caster Warlocks don't have to worry about so much. They need enough constitution to just, maintain a spell, but they're not in melee, so they're not getting hit all the time. They're mostly just worrying about charisma, and they can, pick feats that are going to help them out for their casting role. They're not having to try to take a bunch of feats to make them decent at melee fighting. But all that being said, I still think that they have some decent spells in the selection. They have like Banishing Smite, which is okay. They have a couple other smite spells that don't scale particularly well. And so, like, in general, the spell list is kind of a mixed bag. I'd say it's more bad than good, to be honest. And that's kind of unfortunate. As far as other abilities you're going to get, at level 6 you're going to get your Cursed Spectre, which is going to give you kind of a summons. And like I say, he's okay at level 6, but he doesn't scale particularly well. He will get temporary hit points equal to half your Hex Blade level. But, I mean, even that's not great. By level 20, you're looking at 10 temporary hit points. It doesn't require concentration. It doesn't take a spell slot. It doesn't require an action or a bonus action even to summon. So, I mean, there is that. Basically, first time you kill a humanoid for the day, you just get this guy, and if he doesn't die, he'll last 24 hours, and then he's gone. And then you can get another one the next day. So, I'm not saying that it's a wasted ability. It's actually pretty decent, and in certain circumstances, he is insubstantial, so you could use him as a scout, for example, and send him like through walls and floors and roofs and stuff. But as a melee combatant, he's alright when you first get him, and then kind of trails off pretty rapidly. You're also going to get Armor of Hexes, which means that if the target of your Hexblade's curse hits you, then you can try to ignore the hit, and if you roll 4, 5, or 6, then you negate it completely. That adds a lot of nice survivability to your character. And then at level 14, you're going to get Master of Hexes, so just kind of like regular Hex, you can actually transfer your Hexblade's curse from target to target to target. As long as you're transferring it, you don't get any temporary hit points when the creature dies. It's either you get the hit points and it's gone, or you transfer it to another creature, which would probably be my preferred choice, obviously. And it does add some nice damage to the target. So, you know, there is that, I guess. As far as actual races, obviously anything that adds a lot of charisma is going to be a pretty solid choice. And when you talk about charisma casters, Half-Elf is going to be on that list. I mean, Half-Elf is so good for charisma casters that I almost wish that it wasn't so good. Like, why is it so good? It's just so, it's so good. Plus 2 to your charisma, plus 1 to 2 stats of your choosing. It's always going to be a really solid choice. And especially if you're going to, use shenanigans like Darkness, Devil Sight combo, and give yourself advantage a lot, then you can take things like Elven Accuracy as a feat and give yourself super advantage pretty much at will, or at least until your party just gets mad and decides to kill you in your sleep. So, there is that. Another good solid option, though, speaking of elves, is Drow Elf, because you don't have a lot of spell slots on Warlocks in general, and just getting a few free spells for the day is actually pretty nice. You can even take the Drow High Magic feat, giving you even more free spells, and they don't use spell slots, so it just kind of helps to round out things where you don't have to spend a bunch of invocations to get, utility type spells, which a lot of Warlocks end up doing, and you don't have to use your spell slots for those kind of things either, so it's a pretty solid choice in general. Obviously, you're going to be more of a dex-based character if you're taking any of the elven races, and also you're going to suck in direct sunlight, so depending on your campaign, Drow Elf or half Drow Elf may not be the best of choices, but I'm just going to throw it out there anyways because it's always decent. Obviously, you've got the Tiefling. I mean, this race practically screams infernal creature, and plus 2 to your charisma is going to be great. The standard Tiefling has plus 1 to your intelligence, which is probably not ideal, but if your Dungeon Master allows any of the alternate bloodlines from Xanatars, then you can probably pick something pretty decent. There's a lot of really solid choices from there. As far as other races go, if you're going strength-based, as ridiculous as it sounds, even things like Half-Orc and Goliath can be okay. I mean, you're not getting a charisma bonus, but you can just, point by a bunch of charisma and use ability score increases to take care of those, and then just leave your strength where it is kind of thing. And you're not going to be casting a ton of spells at lower level anyways, because you just don't have a lot of spell slots. you're probably going to be relying more on your sword, and so some of those are all right choices. As far as actual invocations that you might want to consider, I've already mentioned Devil Sight, so you can see in darkness, including magical darkness, and that's an easy way to give yourself advantage against attackers who can't see you. Agonizing Blast is still definitely worth picking up. One of the things that's good about the Pact of the Blade Warlock is that just because you can fight in melee combat doesn't mean that you suddenly lose the ability to cast spells or use things like Eldritch Blast. And Agonizing Blast is going to boost your damage just like it would a Blaster caster Warlock. And having the ability to fight at ranged or in melee combat just helps to make you a lot more versatile. I think that a lot of times people look at things like this and they think, well, I can fight in melee, so now that's just all I'm going to do. And they really overlook the whole thing that, you know, why didn't you just make a barbarian then? You know, you have all these spells available, use them. And people have this kind of mindset that like, well, if you're going with the Pact of the Blade, then all you're going to do is fight in melee. But to me, that's just kind of a silly perspective. I mean, I wouldn't say that, well, I went Pact of the Chain, so now I'm not going to attack at all, and I'm just going to let my imp use his tail stinger every round for my attack. You know, the pet's there to give me versatility, to give me scouting, to give me things like that. It just makes me able to do more and kind of rounds out what I can do. Same with Pact of the Tome. Now it gives me a bunch of cantrips, and I can learn ritual spells from any class, and I can record those. But that doesn't mean that I'm forever now only going to use those 3 cantrips or the ritual spells. I still have all my other spells as well. I just have this added to it. And it's the same with Pact of the Blade. It's not like you can't use Eldritch Blast and Agonizing Blast. It's not like you can't still cast things like Force Cage, you know. All that stuff is still on the table. It's just now you also have the option of being a decent melee fighter. And as you get to higher level and get things like Life Drinker, you can actually be pretty good in melee fighting. So Agonizing Blast to me it's only one invocation, and it's so good, there's almost no reason not to take it on this kind of character. Another one that I really like at lower levels is Fiendish Vigor, which allows you to cast False Life at will. So that's going to give you D4 plus 4 hit points. But since you can cast it at will, it's essentially just going to give you 8 hit points, because you can just keep recasting it over and over and over again until you get a 4. So basically, anytime you're, you know, after a fight, I've got 8 temporary hit points. And you can just keep using it until you know, have the hit points you need. It's important to note that the temporary hit points don't stack. You can only have temporary hit points from one source at a time, which means that not only does it not stack with itself, but it doesn't stack with things like Armor of Agathis either. So if you have temporary hit points from Fiendish Vigor and then you cast Armor of Agathis, your Fiendish Vigor hit points are going to have to be let go. But it's still pretty decent. It's not one that I'd carry with me to higher levels. I would definitely replace it at some point. Maybe even at like level 5 when I could just trade it for Thirsting Blade. And, you know, it'll do its purpose at low level when I'm squishy and need to survive. And then once I've got some more hit points, I don't really care about it so much. But I do think it's a very good selection for low levels. It's better on the Hex Blade probably than it would be on, say, Pact of the Fiend, because Pact of the Fiend, you're also getting temporary hit points when you get a kill, and like I said, they don't stack, so just be aware of that. But it's not a bad choice in either event, and like I said, it's not one you're going to carry for high levels anyways, so, you know. Obviously, Thirsting Blade, I mean, getting a second attack around is going to be pretty crucial if you're playing a melee character. At level 12, you can take Life Drinker, which is going to add your Charisma bonus to your weapon damage when you're using your Pact weapon. And I actually had an argument with somebody with this a while ago because he didn't seem to understand it. But he was saying, well, I don't need that because I've already got my Charisma bonus from Hex Warrior. And it's like, no, Hex Warrior just replaced your Strength or Dex with your Charisma and allows you to use Charisma instead for attack and damage. Life Drinker adds your Charisma bonus to the damage of your Pact weapon. So if you had a 20 Charisma, you would have a +5 to hit from your Charisma and a plus 10 to damage from your charisma, 5 from Pact, from Life Drinker, and 5 from Hex Blade. Other decent ones to think of as well. I don't know that Cloak of Flies is necessarily a super strong pick, but it's not bad. You're going to be in melee combat. It's just going to be a 5-foot aura around you, and it's going to add your charisma bonus in damage to everything within 5 feet of you. So, is it great? Probably not, but it's not necessarily a bad invocation. And sometimes, if you've got a couple things around you, you could easily be doing, 10 or 15 damage around just from that. I don't know that it's the best invocation, but honestly, you get a lot of invocations by the time you're high level. It wouldn't be an early pick for me, but I wouldn't necessarily rule it out either. You're going to be in melee all the time, so it's worth thinking about anyways. And of course, there's always Eldritch Smite, which is going to allow you to basically just Paladin Smite stuff. And you can sacrifice one of your spell slots in order to smite something. It does go through your spells pretty quickly, and unlike, say, a high-level Paladin, who's going to have a lot of spell slots and can use his first and second and third level spell slots for smites when he might not really need them for spells anymore, because by now he has 4th or 5th level spells. You only have 5th level spell slots at high level, and so all those Eldritch Smites are just burning through all your high level spell slots. I mean, you still have your Mystic Arcanum, but I mean, let's be honest, that you have 1 6th level spell, 1 7th level spell, 1 8th level spell, and 1 9th level spell, and that's the only spell you have of that level ever. So hopefully you chose well, but it does use up a lot of spell slots, and unlike the Paladin, you don't necessarily have tons of spell slots to burn. However, you do get them back on a short rest. So if you're in the type of campaign where you're maybe only fighting a couple fights a day, or you fight once or twice and then you take a short rest, you fight once or twice, you take a short rest, you fight once or twice, you take a long rest, repeat the next day, then Eldritch Smite becomes pretty good because it really allows you to pack on a lot of damage. I mean, you're already attacking twice around, maybe even more if you have something like, say, Polearm Mastery and you're using a Polearm. You can stack this with Hex. You can use it with your Hex Blade's Curse. You can use it with, like I said, like Polearm Mastery and get a 3rd attack. And now, you're also adding Life Drinker damage at higher levels. So you can be hitting really, really hard. And this is just going to allow you to burst down single target creatures like really, really fast. So it's great for like boss fights and stuff like that if you don't have to use your resources on a lot of other stuff. If you have a pretty good party where you're not really expected to do anything other than just melee damage, then Eldritch Smite becomes a very strong pick. If you're like melee guy plus CC plus utility guy, it's not always as useful. At least that's what I found anyways. So, as far as feats, I already mentioned Drow High Magic and Elven Accuracy, if those are available to you. Warcaster, I hate to say it, but it's almost a must. By default, you don't have proficiency on your Constitution saving throws, and concentration is going to be a big mechanic when you're constantly getting hit a lot up front. Even if you have medium armor and a shield, you're still going to be getting hit. I mean, even in plate mail, you're still going to be getting hit. And you're going to want to be able to maintain concentration on your spells. So, if you're going to use Sword and Board especially, then you almost for sure have to have Warcaster. I kind of hate saying that because it feels like you're obligated to take it almost, which kind of makes me angry. But that's not necessarily true. You could use a two-handed weapon, or like I said before, use like a polearm or something, and then you have one hand free when you need to cast spells. So, but then you're looking at like a polearm mastery feat or whatever. And as I've already mentioned earlier, you are kind of limited on ASIs. That being said, I do really like polearm mastery as a feat. If you're going to be using a two-handed weapon, I would probably go with a polearm. And the reason is because you can get a third attack around, and that's going to stack with Life Drinker. It's going to stack with any of your other bonuses that you put on. Just the more times you can hit a target, the more times all those bonuses are adding up. And a D4 for the blunt end of your polearm may not sound like a lot, but if you have 20 charisma, that's plus 10 to the damage on top of that. If you have, like, say, Hex Blade's Curse on it, then, you know, you're adding another, whatever your proficiency bonus is, which at high levels could be a plus 5 or a plus 6 to the damage. Or even if you have Hex, that's an extra D6. And it's also another opportunity to cast like an Eldritch Smite or something like that on it. And just the more times you can hit something, the better. Also, it gives you the option of using your reaction when something comes within your reach, which is 10 feet, because you're using a polearm. You can use your reaction to make a melee attack. And again, that's going to benefit from all those same things that are already boosting up your damage quite a bit. And you could be making 3 or even 4 attacks a round on a pretty consistent basis. To be honest, I don't know if I'd really use Hex very much with Polearm Mastery, because I kind of prefer the polearm attack to casting Hex, and both of them use a bonus action. But I found from my own experience playing, I used Hex a lot when something was too far for me to be able to just run into melee combat. Say that the fight started and we were like 50 or 60 feet away. I could use my movement, cast Hex as my bonus action, fire off some Eldritch Blast at the target, and then the next round, just move up into combat range, and now the target's already pre-hexed, assuming that he didn't die. And so now I don't have to worry about it. I don't, you know, you're never going to have, or very rarely going to have a time where you can't do anything because of the fact that you're good in melee or good at range combat. You can attack flying creatures. You can pretty much do any of that kind of stuff. Grasp of Hadar, I should have mentioned as well, because that's not necessarily a bad choice for an invocation. It allowing you to pull something in closer towards you, and since you're, you know, using melee combat, it can be pretty handy to pull stuff in. And especially if you're using something like Cloak of Flies, you could actually be like beating on one guy, and then, you know, see somebody else, and you could like Eldritch Blast them, pull them in, and just, you know, damage more things. You will have disadvantage if you're firing it in melee combat, but like I said, there are things that you can do to get around it. So, you know, Darkness, Devil Sight, improved invisibility, that kind of stuff. So there are ways that you can deal with it. In general, I really like Polearm Mastery on the Warlock, and if I'm going to be going two-handed weapons, I'm probably going to take that even over Great Weapon Mastery, unless I'm going to be constantly able to give myself advantage. And in which case, Polearm Mastery is probably going to fall behind, I would guess. Especially at lower levels. Once you get Life Drinker, it might not be so bad, but, you know, until then, you're probably going to be better off with Great Weapon Mastery. You can do both, but again, you're starting to get really feet heavy. And I know as soon as you start mentioning Polearm Mastery, people are like, oh, you could take it with Sentinel. But now you're getting crazy feet heavy, and you're not a fighter. You don't have a ton of feats to go around. You know, even if you went Hex Blade and you really only have to concentrate on charisma, that's still charisma. You still might need Wardcaster, although it's not quite as required on a two-handed weapon type as it is on like a sword and shield type. But if you're adding Polearm Mastery and Great Weapon Mastery and Sentinel, that's a lot of feats when you only have 5 ASIs. So bear that in mind. Alert's never a bad choice on any class. I really, really like Alert on casters, especially like control type casters, because being able to cast your CC on your enemies before they've all had a chance to move and swarm your party is really optimal. I mean, fireballing your enemy after they've already engaged with your melee guys isn't really so great. Hypnotic patterning the entire front line of your own party, again, not so great. But if you have a high enough initiative, and Alert will help with that, then you can, you know, land those kind of spells. However, I don't know that it's necessarily as required on someone like Bladelock, because a lot of what I'm doing is just fighting in melee combat, and while initiative's never bad on anybody, I don't necessarily know that it's as much of a priority. And so while I really like Alert and Lucky and stuff like that, I don't know that I'd put as much emphasis on them as I would on, say, like Polearm Mastery or something along those lines. But they're always great feats. Alert and Lucky are two of the best feats in the game, so you can never really go wrong with them. And if you rolled with stats, or if your Dungeon Master assigned you a higher array, like say 18, 16, 14, 12, 10, 8 or something, then that really starts to free up a lot of ASIs. You don't have to worry about this other stuff as much. You know, you can max your charisma out pretty easy. If you rolled an 18 or have an 18, you could start with like Tiefling or High Elf, or Half Elf, sorry, and you could have 20 charisma right off the bat. And now all your feats, or all your ASIs, you can use towards feats. You know, you can take stuff like Warcaster and everything else, and you're probably going to be in a very strong position, and you can start, you know, customizing yourself a lot more. But if you're just using like standard array, for example, you probably don't have enough ASIs to go around, and you really kind of need to just focus on what you want to be good at, not just try to be great at everything, because that's usually a good way to be mediocre at everything. So now I'm going to talk about some actual build ideas. And I already mentioned the idea of starting Fighter if you're going with, say, like Pact of the Fiend. And to me, Fighter is a great choice. If you only take one level of Fighter, you still get your bonus action heal. You've still got a fighting style. You've got heavy armor, and you can use a shield. And it's you know, proficiency on Constitution saves. So it's just a solid choice. And honestly, what I did on my character, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, but my Dungeon Master told me that we were going to be ending somewhere between like level 9 and 12. And since I figured I wasn't going to get Life Drinker anyways, or if we did, it would be at the very, very end of the campaign, I started with Fighter 1, went to Warlock 5 to get my second attack around, and then went back to Fighter 2 to get Action Surge, and Fighter 3, I took Battlemaster and got a bunch of maneuvers and some superiority dice, and then I just went back to Warlock. And the campaign ended when we were level 9, so I only got one more level of Warlock. Like I said, if I felt that I was going to get high enough to use some of the high-end Warlock abilities, I might not have taken a second and third level fighter, although Action Surge is still so good that it's pretty hard to pass up on that. You know, if you're taking one level of fighter, it's kind of like, I might as well just take two, you know. But I probably wouldn't have bothered with Battlemaster. But since I knew the campaign wasn't going to be going that high, I thought that having a bunch of maneuvers was probably going to be more useful to me than having a bunch of stuff at the very end of the campaign that I was almost never going to have a chance to use. But other alternatives to going fighter are the War Cleric or Life Cleric, which are both very strong choices as well, and Paladin, although Paladin you're going to want to take 2 levels. The reason I say War Cleric and Life Cleric is because both of them get heavy armor proficiency as a class ability. Now, if you look at the multi-classing rules, you usually only get, well, you can never get more than medium armor proficiency by multi-classing into a different class. So if you started Warlock and then later decided you wanted to go Fighter, you'd only get medium armor proficiency, and you only have the saving throws of your initial class. So you won't be able to pick up like Constitution or Strength saving throws by multi-classing into Fighter. That's not the case with Life and War Cleric. Because they get heavy armor proficiency as a class ability at level 1, you could start Warlock, go to like level 5, get your 3rd level spell slot as quick as possible, get your second attack around as quick as possible, and then you could multi-class into War Cleric or Life Cleric for just 1 level and get heavy armor proficiency. Another nice thing about this is that, especially combined with, say, the Hex Blade, this will give you some 1st level spell slots that you can cast stuff like Shield with. And now suddenly Shield becomes a pretty decent choice, because you can use your Cleric spell slots for stuff like that, and you can use your Warlock spell slots for stuff that's going to level up. You can even use your Warlock spell slots for things like Bless, if you have a large party and want to bless more things, or if you're taking something like, say, you know, Healing Word or Cure Wounds or something, and you want those to kind of scale up with your level. Because the way Pact magic works is that since it recharges on a short rest, and since your other magics of all types recharge on a long rest, they're always kept separate. but it specifically says you can cast one type with the other. So you could use your Hex Blade shield with your Cleric or Paladin spell list at level 1. And now you don't have to worry about any of the scaling issues, and it becomes a very, very solid pick suddenly, because now you're not having to worry about any of that. The reason I said Paladin as well is because this one's kind of a more specific type of build. But Paladin's going to give you a lot of the same stuff the Fighter gave you. It's not going to give you Constitution proficiency, but it will give you heavy armor if you start there, and it'll give you a fighting style at level 2. It'll also give you like light hands, although if you only take 2 levels, that's not going to be a lot of healing, but sometimes 10 hit points worth could be enough. And it's going to give you Paladin Smites, which will recharge on a short rest. You can even stack these with Eldritch Smite, and now you're going to have to burn through 2 spell slots when you hit something, but it means that you can really, really burn hard now, because you can stack 2 different smites with 1 melee hit. Now, this isn't necessarily going to be good for your, if you're in a deep dungeon run, you probably won't want to do this unless you're fighting like a boss or something like that, because you're just going to be out of spell slots in no time. But it does mean that you can burn hard like nothing else in the game almost, especially when you have higher level spell slots. Another version is to just take 6 levels of Paladin so you can get the Aura of Protection, or even 7 levels of Paladin if you went with Aura of the Ancients, or Oath of the Ancients, because the 7th level Aura is just so good, cutting all spell damage down by 50%. And then if you make your saving throw, you're looking at a quarter damage. I mean, at that point, casters are, barely an inconvenience. No trouble at all. So, but that's a heavy investment into Paladin. And, if you look at 6 or 7 levels of Paladin, even in a campaign that goes all the way to 20, it means you're looking at 13 or 14 levels of Warlock. It means you're not going to have 8th or 9th level spells, which, to be fair on a Warlock, isn't necessarily so tragic, because you only had 1 choice for a 9th level spell. You only had 1 choice for an 8th level spell. And while Foresight would be pretty good, you might be able to live without it. And if you just value the higher saving throws more, then, Aura of Protection with 20 Charisma is going to be a great boost, not just for you, but for any other frontline melee fighters that are standing next to you. It also means that you don't have to take Thirsting Blade, so that frees up an invocation that you can use from something else, because you'll be able to get your extra attack from Paladin. And since they don't stack, you can only use one or the other anyways. Now you can take some other invocation instead of Thirsting Blade. There's also some pretty good builds you could take which aren't really Pact of the Blade. I'm not going to go into depth because this is about the Blade Warlock, but things like, everybody's probably heard of the Sorlock, or as I like to call it, the Warcerer, which is basically you just take 2 levels of Warlock and all the rest Sorcerer. I've even seen people online joke about, like, why would you even need to have a Warlock guide, because all you ever need is 2 levels of Warlock and then whatever else, right? Because all they want is Eldritch Blast and Agonizing Blast. But on Sorcerer, it's a particularly strong combo, because you can quicken cast your Eldritch Blast and fire off, why stop at 4 bolts in a round? Why not cast 8 bolts? And each one of those is doing an extra or an extra +5 from your Charisma bonus. And it's extremely strong. And it's pretty good with the Hex Blade, because now you're just a caster who can wear medium armor and use a shield. But like I said, it's not an actual Bladelock build, so I don't really want to go into a lot of depth about it. I will maybe make a video in the future talking about like Hex Blade builds that aren't melee focused, that are more caster focused, and that would definitely be one of the things I would talk about, would be in that one. But let's try to just stick to the melee fighters for now. As far as other stuff, just to kind of sum this video up, it's already gone on long enough, I'm sure. I think that as it first came out, the Bladelock did have a lot of flaws and weaknesses. And that's not to say that it wasn't fun. I mean, I made my guy before Hex Blade was available, and I had a lot of fun on that guy. But I also took a bunch of levels of fighter because a lot of the criticisms of the Hex Blade, or of the Bladelock, I felt were pretty valid. You don't have a lot of hit points. You do have bad armor, you know, and you're not even necessarily going to out-damage Eldritch Blast plus Agonizing Blast, which you can be casting safely from a distance. But fighter took care of a lot of that, and in the party we had, our only other frontline fighter was a Barbarian, and personally I kind of like having a couple frontline fighters. One is often just not enough, and I didn't have to feel like I was needed to do a ton of casting because we had other pure dedicated casters who could do CC and stuff like that, and you know, we had a Bard who basically just went all in on the utility end of things, so that was pretty decent as well. And it allowed me to just focus more on just being kind of tanky and doing lots of damage. And the Barbarian did a truckload of damage too. That was Troy's character. He was a machine, as most Barbarians seem to be. But I kind of like the feeling of having a lot of options on my characters and having magic and melee combined with also good range attacks. It's just kind of something that really appeals to me. You can also break out a force cage and stuff like that when you need to. And it's just a pretty strong choice in general. So hopefully I kind of covered everything. Hopefully this video wasn't too disjointed. I feel like I started rambling a lot towards the end here, but that's just kind of, you know, my style. I need to like keep better notes so that I can like at least look down at them and be like, oh hey, you didn't mention this, and try to keep myself focused. But hopefully this video wasn't too bad anyways. There's a lot to cover here. I really like the Bladelock, to be honest. It's a very enjoyable class, and I had a lot of fun playing with it. And I might even make another one in the future because there's so many things that I didn't get to do on the first one that I could, you know, take the class in completely different directions the next time around. Oh, I should even mention the idea of the 1 level Hex Blade dip, because honestly, it's just so good. I already mentioned like the whole Warlock idea. Just, you know, take a 1 level Hex Blade or 2 levels of Hex Blades, you can get Agonizing Blast and medium armor and a shield. But it's pretty solid on things like Lore Bards too, because you can take 1 level or 2 levels of Warlock, get Agonizing Blast, which is one of the things that, like, if there's one weakness that Bards have, it's that they just don't do a lot of damage. They basically do everything else in the game, but they don't necessarily do a lot of damage. And this can help recover for that. But it also means that you can have a Lore Bard with medium armor and a shield, and you could, you know, take that at like level 2 or something, and you have it sooner than, say, a Valor Bard would, you know. And just for being a caster in general, picking up a level of Hexblade is really good. If you're using Charisma, at least consider it. Having 1 stat for all your attacks and damages and casting is a pretty phenomenal ability as well. So anyways, hopefully that's everything. Don't be afraid to hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because I don't even know if liking things does anything anymore. Who knows with YouTube? But stay tuned, because in the future we'll have more videos, and I'm hoping that later this week I will have my War Cleric video that I'm going to be doing with my friend Jaden. And he played a War Cleric in one of my campaigns to level 18, so he had a lot of experience with it. I played a War Cleric one night in his Out of the Abyss campaign, and we got to level 3. And the whole reason we played is because a bunch of our people were missing, so we were just like, well, instead of canceling, let's just play something else for the night. And then we never went back to it, of course. Although I've always kind of wanted to, but there's so many things to play and so little time to play it these days. Anyways, that's everything. Hopefully you enjoyed the video and maybe even got a few ideas. And I'll see you next time in the dungeon.